Okay, let's start with a huge question. What actually holds society together? It's a massive idea, right? And to even begin to answer it, we're going to dive into one of the most, well, brutal and honestly fascinating experiments in social order ever. No, seriously, just think about it for a second. You expect the mail to show up, right? You expect the police to come if you call them. You expect taxes to get collected. All these things, they're like these invisible threads holding everything together, and we almost never have to think about them. And that right there, that ability to just not have to think about whether society is going to collapse tomorrow, that is a total modern luxury. So when you hear a quote like this, it really reframes the whole thing, doesn't it? That absence of constant fear, that quiet, kind of unspoken assumption that things will be stable. That's the real sign of a society that's actually working. So what happens when all those ties just disappear? To find out, we're not going to look at some modern failed state. Nope, we're actually going back in time, way back, to a world that literally had to reinvent social order from scratch. All right, so welcome to our case study, the world of the Merovingian Franks back in 6th century Gaul. You've got this warrior dynasty, and they're building a whole new kingdom right from the ashes of the Roman Empire. And let me tell you, they are running a bold and very often a very brutal experiment in what it takes to hold a society together. Now, this is super important. This isn't, a total apocalypse movie. It's more of a transformation, a cultural remix, if you will. You've got these old Roman traditions, like the church, still hanging around, but now they're getting mixed in with these brand new, powerful warrior cultures. And this is a really key distinction to make. We're not talking about a modern failed state where there's just a vacuum of power and chaos. Oh no. The Frankish world had plenty of power. It just operated by a completely different set of rules. It wasn't a broken system. It was an entirely new one being built. So what was this new system built on? Well, the first big pillar of power was the king. But trust me, this was not the kind of king you read about in fairy tales. Okay, so a Merovingian king's power really came from two places. First, you've got this kind of mystical, almost sacred prestige. It was symbolized by their long hair. Seriously, they never cut it. To have it cut was like the ultimate humiliation. And then there was the second source of power, something much more practical. It was all about being a great war leader, someone who could lead their followers into battle and, crucially, reward them with a whole lot of plunder. And look, there is no better example of this weird contradiction than a guy named King Chilperic. I mean, this man wrote poetry, he debated theology, he even wanted to reform the alphabet. At the same time, he was a polygamous, absolutely ruthless murderer. And there's one story that it perfectly captures this whole bonkers world. So the story begins with a marriage proposal. Chilperic sets his sights on Galswintha, a princess with a vast fortune. He goes to her father and promises, hey, I'll renounce all my other wives, all to secure this political alliance and, her absolutely massive treasure. And this line from the guy who wrote all this down, Gregory of Tours, it just tells you everything you need to know about the situation. His motivation was not love. It was cold, hard treasure. That's what fueled his power. But there was a problem, a big one. Chilperic just couldn't give up his other favorite wife, a woman named Fredegund. So Galswin, who's clearly no fool, sees what's happening and makes a totally reasonable offer. She says, look, just let me go home. You can even keep all my treasure. And Chilperic's response? He had a slave strangle her in her bed. Just like that. A few days later, he officially took Fredegund back as his wife. And that is power pillar number 1. Raw, immediate, physical terror. The kind of power that is completely unchecked by any law that we would recognize. Okay, so if the king has that kind of immediate, violent power, what on earth could possibly keep that in check, right? Well, that brings us to the second pillar holding this whole world together, the church. And this is the absolute core dynamic you need to understand. The king can threaten your life right here, right now. He can kill your body. But the church, they wielded a totally different kind of weapon. Through its bishops and its saints, it controlled the ultimate, supernatural terror of what would happen to your immortal soul for all of eternity. And believe me, this was not some abstract philosophical idea. This is something the historian Gregory of Tours actually said to King Chilperic's face. Can you imagine that? A bishop standing there threatening this king, a guy who murders his wives, remember, with the anger of God and his saints, the sheer guts. And people took this supernatural power deadly seriously. I mean, just listen to this story. Some monks warn a group of soldiers, hey, do not loot the monastery of St. Martin. So what do the soldiers do? They ignore the warning, cross the river, slaughter the monks, and steal everything. But as they're trying to get away, divine retribution is incredibly swift. Their boat starts spinning like crazy in the middle of the river and then just splits apart. And the final gruesome punishment? They're all impaled and killed by their own spears. The message could not be clearer. You mess with the saints, you pay with your life. Period. So you put all this together, and what do you get? Well, you get a completely new kind of social order, one that's built on a very delicate and frankly terrifying balance of power. So it really all boils down to these two competing forces. On one hand, you have the king's power. It's immediate, it's physical, it's enforced with swords. On the other hand, you have the church's power. It's ultimate, it's supernatural, and it's enforced by the fear of what comes after you die. And together, somehow, they create this brutal but stable equilibrium. So the big takeaway here is that this society, for all of its incredible violence, actually worked. It wasn't a failed state. It wasn't collapsing. It had its own coherent, if pretty terrifying, operating system. And it wasn't held together by laws or paperwork. It was held together by this twin engine of fear. Fear for your body and fear for your soul. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. Look, we may not be afraid of barbarian kings or vengeful saints anymore. But it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the invisible forces, the systems of power, and maybe even fear that hold our world together, the world we take for granted every single day?